What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Shelf, and today we are going to be talking about Cuckoo. This is going to be a spoiler-filled discussion about Cuckoo, so if you have not seen this movie, then this video is probably not for you. This is a movie that I saw trailers for earlier in the year, and I was pretty excited for it. It looked pretty cool. Neon's been having a great year so far, producing my favorite horror film of the year, Longlegs. I really love Dan Stevens and everything I've seen him in, and I was excited to see what Hunter Schafer was all about since I haven't really seen Euphoria. So the interest was definitely there. I love seeing these unique, original horror films. If there's a horror film that has even the smallest chance of being good, then I will most likely be seeing it in theaters. Unfortunately for me, as the title would suggest, this was something that I really wanted to like, but ultimately it just didn't really work for me overall. So what I'll start off by saying is that early on in the film, I was really into what the movie was doing. I was curious as to where it was going, and there's a particular scare early on in the film that, when it was happening, immediately reminded me of a scene from Dario Argento's Phenomena. So from that scene on, I felt like I was in pretty good hands, but unfortunately for me, the movie kind of peaks with that scene, and it never really hits those same highs ever again. The film is pretty all over the place. It's kind of a mess. It kind of jumps around with little to no coherency, with very little connective tissue like between each scene. Characters are introduced, ideas are presented, and they're all just kind of like mildly related to one another in the same way that your best friend's girlfriend's step-cousin is related to each other, which is to say that they don't feel very related at all. Now, it's important to note here that I have not watched any other reviews of this movie. I really like my thoughts to be my own thoughts, and I don't want to kind of be colored by other people's opinions, at least until after I've done my review, because it's important that my thoughts are sort of just my thoughts, you know? I don't want to, like I said, have sort of other people coloring my experience, right? It's also important to note that the writer-director, Tillman Singer, got his debut doing a thesis film called Luz, which is sort of an homage to 1980s European horror films. So with that in mind, it's safe to say that any sort of references to Argento or Italian horror giallo films in general is definitely most likely deliberate. So with that being said, the lack of cohesion between plot points is also most likely very deliberate because structurally, a lot of 1980s European horror films, I think most specifically of Inferno, which is another Dario Argento film, the plot of that movie is very like loosey-goosey, kind of like a vibes movie. If you spend too long thinking about the plot, you're most likely going to be disappointed. So if it's safe to say that he's trying to imitate that sort of style, then it makes sense as to why this movie feels like such a mess. I'm not averse to the notion of a movie having an incoherent plot and making the viewer just kind of go with the flow. I think it works better in classic films as opposed to modern ones, because with modern films, I'm not as conditioned to expect that sort of thing, especially with what is seemingly an American production. I know that they filmed this in Germany and had the participation of a lot of German producers and production companies. So there was definitely like some German European flair here, but yeah, when you watch a modern movie like this, you're not really expecting it to have that sort of plot structure. So when it does happen on the first viewing, you're kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? This isn't like a normal movie. And that's kind of what happened with me. So even though this didn't quite work for me on my first viewing, I have a feeling that I could like it more on repeat viewings, and I can definitely appreciate what Tillman Singer was going for here. Speaking to the story a little bit, in the finale, there is this like plot resolution involving Alma and main character Gretchen, played by Hunter Schafer. Alma is her half-sister, and there's this revelation, this plot beat that happens where the two of them come to grow closer together, and in doing so, they're able to survive the events of the film. I'm speaking kind of vaguely because to describe the plot of this movie, first of all, I don't even think I could do it, and secondly, it would take too long, and this video would be longer than it already is. But anyway, when this happens in the film, it's sort of played as this big victory, and as someone who didn't think it was set up properly, it kind of landed with a thud for me, and sort of was just more confusing than anything else. Because I spend so much of the first two acts of the film like wondering what the hell's going on, And Alma is this character who doesn't have really any depth. Her character is not a character who is able to speak, so she's very one-dimensional, and it's not any fault of like the child actor portraying her. It's just the way that it's written. And Gretchen spends a lot of the runtime not really seeming to care about her very much. She even goes out of her way to say that she's not her real sister. Gretchen is a sort of shitty teenager, so it's not unnatural for her to say something like that, while still obviously feeling differently on the inside, and that's what comes to fruition in the third act. So I understand all of that, but it just didn't feel like a satisfying conclusion to everything we'd been watching up until that point. It kind of just comes out of nowhere for me, even though it is set up, but I was like, oh, well, surely that's not where this is going. By that point in the movie, I was just kind of hoping for something other than a very generic, cathartic sister dynamic finale. Like, that was just sort of disappointing for me. So, like, selfishly, I really wanted to like this more than I did, but the problems with the plot and the story structure kept me from really enjoying it. But it's a movie that I can appreciate and definitely will see myself watching again in the future. However, at the end of the day, it was just a frustrating experience for me more than anything else. I really liked the sound design and the way that the film was edited in particular, especially when like the weird things are happening. It's edited in a really interesting way that kind of keeps you captivated and like wanting to see like what's going to happen. The performances are also all really great across the board here, but the story, the themes, and the plot structure all just kind of felt really muddled to me. Like they didn't really know exactly what they were trying to do, and like by virtue of that, it becomes it takes on this other sort of, it becomes this other mysterious third thing. I don't know. It was just very confusing to me, and like not in a good way. I don't typically consider myself to be someone who like needs to be spoon-fed exactly what's happening in a movie. I like a fair bit of ambiguity. I really do. But with this film, there's so many moments where you're just kind of like, huh? That like after a while it just becomes a bit too much, and by the time it's over, you don't really feel like you had a meaningful experience, or at least I did. Again, this is all just my opinion. Maybe some of you didn't have the same issues that I did with the structure and everything. And if so, that's great. I hope to revisit this at some point in the future, and maybe a lot of these things that I'm pointing out won't really be a problem for me in the future. So anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on Cuckoo. Definitely an interesting movie, one that I'm glad that I saw in theaters. Not going to crack my top 10 or anything like that, but definitely like a cool movie that if you're curious about it, I suggest you go check it out. Alright guys, so with all that being said, this has been Tales from the Shelf. Make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe if you're into that sort of thing. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, movie stuff in general. So with all that out of the way, make sure you take care and watch more movies.